Hey everyone, it's PK here. Hope you're doing really well. Um, Today I want to talk about borrowing capacity. So I know that there are so many of you out there, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of investors that follow me and others as well, that think that, look, with borrowing capacity as hard as it is these days, with lending requirements as tough as they are these days, there is no way I'll ever be able to borrow enough money to be able to acquire a property portfolio of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 properties, 8, 9, 10, whatever the case may be for you, right? So many people think about the number of properties they need in order to achieve their passive income goal, and then come to the conclusion, well, the bank will never loan me $1 million. The bank will never loan me $1.5 million. The bank will never loan me $2 million, $2.5 million. And this conception, it demoralizes people, and it makes them think, look, property investing isn't for me. I'm not going to invest in property. It's a failure to start with. I'm doomed. I'm never going to be successful because of borrowing capacity, right? But the reality is that borrowing capacity changes over time. So let me give you a story. Let me give you an example of someone I worked with that is a really good example of this. The example of borrowing capacity actually increasing over time, and that allowing a person to buy more and more property. So about 5 years ago, I was working with a lady. She lived in Sydney. She was a single mum, and at the time, her income was about $70,000. So average sort of income, kind of statistically average income. And at the time, this was at the start of the APRA clampdowns, the Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority's clampdowns on banks giving investors loans, investor loans. So, at the time she only had $70,000 income, or $80,000 income, something like that. And her borrowing capacity was well under $1 million. I think it was under $700,000 actually. So, if she had thought, look, my goal from property investing is to create a passive income, to achieve a passive income of, let's say, replacing her income of $80,000 in 10 or 15 years' time, she would have come to the conclusion, in which we did, when it comes to strategy, that she would need, let's say, 6 properties. And she would need them to perform in such a way, and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. She would sell off a few after 10, 15 years' time, and Bob's your uncle. Right? So the strategy was clear, but she could have been really demoralized to say, well, how on earth am I going to get, how am I ever going to get, 6, 7, 8 properties when I only earn $80,000 and I don't have a borrowing capacity of more than $1 million. In fact, it's much less than $1 million. So how do I go from here? What do I do? She could have easily said, property investing's not for me. I'm just going to play it safe. I'm going to buy a principal place of residence, pay it down, and then by the time I retire, I'll have a house that's fully paid off, and then at least I don't have to worry about mortgage stress. Okay, and I know that so many people think that way, and it's not wrong, but it's just limited thinking, right? If you think that you can't get borrowing capacity to generate a passive income through property, and then you sort of fall back on the default, which is, let me just work hard all my life to pay off my mortgage, slowly and surely, and then by the time I retire, 65, 70, 75, hopefully my house is paid off, and then Bob's your uncle. I can get the government pension of $30,000 and no mortgage, I can at least survive. Look, that's definitely one type of thinking, but what this lady 5 years ago did was say, look, that's not good enough for me. I want to aspire for something greater. I want to actually aspire for some livable passive income in 10 to 15 to 20 years' time, well before I'm 60. And I'm really going to shoot for this, right? So what she did and what we did was instead of maxing out her borrowing capacity of whatever it was, I can't remember, $700,000-800,000 immediately, we bought multiple smaller properties. Because the way that lending works in most instances is if the bank is willing to give you, let's say, an $800,000 loan, they are going to be willing to give you three $300,000 loans. Or, let me make sure I do the math correctly here, or two $450,000 loans. Okay, the bank likes smaller loan amounts because with smaller loan amounts comes less expensive property. Less expensive property, more affordable property generally means higher yield. Okay, so what we did was we've actually, I can't take the credit. She's learned how to invest in property through my help, and she has bought 3 properties over the last 5 years, and now her borrowing capacity is close to maxed out. But here's the thing. Those properties, the first one was in Tasmania, I think the second one was in regional Victoria, I think it was Inner Ballarat from memory, and the third one was in Newcastle. That was one that was more around $400,000. All 3 of these properties have gone up. The Tassie one has gone up from about 230 to 300. The Newcastle one has gone up from about, I think it was about 350 or 400 to about 550 in these last, I think that's been 3 years. And the Ballarat one has actually gone up like $130,000 in the last 2.5 years. Okay, so the thing with borrowing capacity is she could have thought, look, I can never buy 7 properties to generate me a passive income. Let's not even try. But she tried, and she succeeded. Okay, so now she's got 3 properties. Initial purchase price altogether was about $900,000, which is her cumulative borrowing capacity at the point of purchase. But now she has more than $300,000 or $400,000 in equity. And remember, this is from a starting position of less than $150,000 in savings. That's not all in one go either. You know, the Ballarat, actually not even 1.5 million. I think it was less than 1 million. What am I saying? Savings, in terms of deposit, she had less than $150,000. Okay, so the Ballarat one, she had to put in about $50,000 deposit. For Tassie, $35,000 deposit, and for Newcastle, on a purchase price of I think $350 to $400, it was about $60,000 deposit. So let's say a deposit in total of under $130,000 has resulted in $300,000 to $400,000 of equity in 3 to 5 years' time. She didn't buy all those properties 5 years ago. It was staged. Okay, so yes, she's maxed out her borrowing capacity now, but here's the thing. Her life situation changes. Our life situations change. And also our property portfolio matures. So now that her LVR is no longer up at 88 or 90, it's more down in the 70s, the bank is more likely to entertain giving her more loans. Plus, her income from 5 years ago, which was $70,000 to $80,000, which I said at the start, is now more like $120,000. Plus, the rents have been rising for each of those 3 properties. Rents don't rise in correlation or direct proportion to capital growth or capital gains, but if there's capital growth, there's a good chance that rents rise as well. So total, I think each of those 3 properties, the rents have risen by about $60 or $70. Actually, it's probably more than that. I don't know these numbers off the top of my head, but it's probably close to $90 a week, which on an annualized basis is amazing. That's more than that's more than a sort of average pay rise for the average person. So you combine the lowered LVR, her gross income increase from her employer, plus the rental increase. These 3 combined mean that she can actually borrow again. It means that she can actually take out another loan, right? And remember, she doesn't have a husband, so she's not relying on 2 sources of income here. By herself, she can now, 5 years from her starting point, she can get her fourth property. And she's not coming back to me to buy the fourth property, because I'm not a buyer's agent. I simply teach you how to do this yourself so you can become self-sustaining. So that's the thing, you know, she only had less than $120,000 of savings back in 2015, less than $800,000 or $900,000 of borrowing capacity. Now, fast forward 3 to 5 years, she has more than $300,000 or $400,000 in equity. Her rents have risen by about $90 per week in total across the 3 properties. Her gross income from her employer has increased, because that's the type of job she's in, and she gets a good sort of $10,000 pay increase every year. Those 3 things, and the LVR is reduced in her property portfolio due to growth. Those 3 things combined have meant that now she can afford her fourth property. And yes, once she purchases the fourth property, she'll max out that borrowing capacity again. But like I said, if you're buying for capital growth, if you're buying for positive cash flow, if your rents are increasing, then in another 2-3 years' time, the LVR will go down again, the equity will go up again, the rents will go up again, and her income will continue to increase, even if it's just at CPI, right? So these 3 to 4 things combined means that if you're doing property investing correctly, it's not always the case that your borrowing capacity reduces and reduces and reduces. Life actually happens. You get promotions, you get pay increases, rents increase over time, not immediately, over time. Capital growth occurs. All these things can occur. So if you're thinking, look, right now I'm only making $80,000, I'm only making $100,000. Maybe you're married, you're making $150,000, but you're thinking, look, there's still no way I can get $3 million of debt to buy enough properties to retire off property. Well, really the moral of the story is you don't need that borrowing capacity to start with. Life evolves, property portfolios evolve, you go on a journey. And if you're doing it right, if you're buying for positive cash flow every single time, if you're buying for short-term growth every single time, not long-term growth, right? Not just based on long-term population projections, the fact that it's close to a CBD, the fact that a suburb is close to a school or a hospital or train station. All these things don't impact short-term growth. You need to find short-term growth factors using data. So positive cash flow, short-term growth, hopefully you don't become unemployed or your pay doesn't go backwards. If these 3 things occur, then you'll get more and more equity in your portfolio, rents will increase, your LVR will drop, and you will be able to borrow for more and more property. Obviously, there is a limit, there is a ceiling, but like I've said before, you don't need 10 properties to retire off on a $80,000 to $100,000 to $120,000 passive income. You don't need 12 properties, you don't need 15 properties. Most clients that I work with, they need between 3 to 7 properties in the long term to be able to comfortably retire off property investing. And most people actually don't want to retire, they just want to have flexibility, right? So if you're at the start of your property journey, but maybe even more importantly, if you're a couple of properties in and you do want some flexibility in the future, you do want in 10 or 15 years time to have flexibility to leave your work, even if you love your work, right? And plenty of us love what we do. But if you just want to have the option to wind down your hours or do something else, then property investing is always, always, always a good choice. Okay, and yes, in the last 5 years, borrowing capacity has been difficult. Yes, APRA has made things hard for property investors. But the thing is that these tough times aren't going to last forever. Banks are in the business of giving loans. If they are restricted by the regulatory authority, then they can't give as many loans as they want. But they are in the business of giving loans. That is fundamentally how they make money. So I want you to fast forward 5 years. I want you to fast forward 10 years even, and think to yourself, are the current lending restrictions going to sustain? Is it going to be as hard to get a loan as it is last year or today? in 5 or 10 years time from now. And I mean, I can't predict the future, at least not in terms of lending capacity, but chances are that it will become more and more lenient. And we're already seeing that in the last 6 months as well. It will become more and more lenient. And look, it might go back to 2012 levels where everyone and their dog could get a loan. Now, that's not necessarily a healthy thing. But if you start property investing now, and by the time it comes to 5 years or 10 years, you've already got 3-4 properties or more properties, then you can just supercharge that portfolio once lending becomes more easy. You know, you might have thought you've maxed out your borrowing capacity, but fast forward 5 years, all of a sudden, you've got another $1 million to lend, or another $1.5 million to lend. But if you wait for that, then that's not so effective. So make sure you start now, right? Positive cash flow, rental increases, reducing your LVR, increasing your equity, working hard in your 9 to 5 or your business to service your portfolio, and then let your portfolio evolve. Let it do what you need it to do, and allow that portfolio to afford you more property purchases, and then identify how many properties you need to achieve your passive income goal. You know, you don't need 10, 15 properties. Most people that are just everyday Australians or everyday people, they don't want to buy a mansion. They don't want to live in Toorak in Melbourne, or Hawthorne, or Bulimba in Brisbane, or Mossman in Sydney. They don't need that AMG Mercedes. Most people just want a 6-figure passive income from property so that they can continue driving their Honda or Toyota or Kia or Audi, but just have flexibility so they can spend more time doing the things that they love with the people they love. So the message is, if that's you, take heart. Don't think borrowing capacity is a drain. In fact, like I explained with the lady, one of my clients from 5 years ago, it's possible to increase your borrowing capacity over time if you buy right. Okay, have a great Wednesday. My name's PK, and yeah, if this was useful, give me a like or a love, give me some energy back, and just comment below if you have any questions or comments, and I'll also pop a link in here where you can find out more info. Catch you guys, bye.